All right, good afternoon and welcome to St. Joseph's Unlimited Learning Series. I'm David Werner from the class of 2020 somehow, and I will be your host today for today's web. I am joined by Dr. Joseph, Director of Programs at St. Joseph University's Kinney Center for Autism Education and Support, and Dr. Cheryl George, Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of Special Education. Transitions are often difficult with individuals with an autism spectrum disorder, developmental disabilities, and their families as well. But the transition from adolescence and K-12 education to adulthood might be the most daunting for families with the routines and steady support systems other schools coming to it. To help individuals prepare for their next chapter, whether it's entering the workforce, vocational school, college, there are resources that families can take advantage of as early as preteen years. Today we'll be discussing the importance of transition services and how parents and educators can help teens and preteens gain lifelong skills and tools for success. Okay. Key element of the SJU's mission is the commitment to lifelong learning. That mission led to the creation of the Unlimited Learning Series and today's interactive discussion on transitional services. I want to thank St. Joseph's University for coordinating today's event, my alma mater, giving us the space to talk about such an important topic, and also thank you all for taking time out of your day to attend. To help us get a better sense of the room, we welcome attendees to take part in our first anonymous poll question that will pop on your screen momentarily. Thank you all our attendees who submitted questions during registration. We'll address some of your questions later in the hour. If you have any questions during the course of the webinar, please feel free to place them in the Q&A feature below on your screen. We'll ask you that you please include your name, location, graduation year if you're an alumni. All right, and it looks like our first poll responses are in. So about 5% of you said, I am a student interested in working with individuals with autism. A majority of you are parents with an individual with autism. 9% of you are teachers, school interested in learning more about individuals with autism. Another 9% is mental health practitioners who work with individuals with autism. And the second majority of 36% does not fit into any of the above categories, but is more interested in learning more about individuals with autism. All right, good. Let's start off a little bit of the discussion by having Dr. Joseph. Can you explain the importance of transition programs for students with the autistic spectrum disorder and what they involve?
Yes, thank you, David, so much for the introduction. I really appreciate it. In general, there's two critical turning points in the lives of individuals with disabilities and their families. The first is when they enter the special education system, and the second is when they leave it. This discussion is geared towards helping individuals with autism as they prepare to leave the world of special education. In order to be successful in this process, the context of secondary school into the next phase, either that's entering school or also the workforce, it's critical for all parties to be involved to prepare for issues that need to be addressed well in advance. It's important also to become knowledgeable about the resources at the local, state, and also federal levels in order to assist both individuals and their parents in this transition process.
Thank you very much. And what does that transition process look like in the IEP or individualized educational plan for people that don't like acronyms and like long words? Does it apply only to students with ASD? Dr. George, this is where you take over briefly.
Thank you so much, David. So transition planning is a results-oriented process, and it occurs annually as a part of the IEP or Individualized Education Program team meeting in the year that the student turns 14 or younger, if deemed appropriate by the IEP team. Now, if you're listening in from a state other than Pennsylvania, this transition planning process might start a little later, but the federal law requires that it begin no later than the year the student turns 16. At that time, the student must be invited to participate in the IEP meetings. So anytime the purpose of the meeting is to discuss the student's post-secondary goals and related transition services, the student must be provided. And of course, the parents or whoever has educational rights are always an important part of the IEP team. One thing that's really important to be thinking about in transition planning, even before the age of 14, is the student's strengths, interests, and preferences, so that you can be thinking about how those strengths, interests, and preferences might be incorporated into a job that the individual would excel at and enjoy. It's also really important to be honest about any social and adaptive skills that need to be developed over the course of the years that the student is in school. Keeping in mind that the student may graduate or exit from high school at age 18 or may remain in school up until the age of 21. The three main topics that are considered in detail in transition planning are post-secondary education and training goals. So is the student going to a four-year university like David did, or a community school, or a community college, or a two-year program? And what academic skills need to be in place for that success? Employment goals are considered, whether or not the student would be seeking competitive employment, which is full or part-time at or above minimum wage employment, or integrated or supported employment with job coaching that can be phased over time. And the third main area is independent living goals, if appropriate, and what would that involve? And it could be even what is that going to look like in college? So budgeting, taking Uber rides or other transportation, cooking, shopping, and so on. Linkages to agencies is a very important part of the transition planning process. So in addition to the student beginning to come to the IEP meetings, you may see career and technology education representatives, and you may see and should see community agency representatives if they will be providing or paying for transition services. The ultimate goal during the school years is to increase academic and functional achievement to facilitate the students' movement from school to post-school activities. And in answer to your last question, David, the transition planning process applies not only to students on the spectrum, but to any student who, number one, has a disability, and two, needs special education as determined by the IEP team.
Thank you very much, Dr. George. And now it's time for some questions. How can parents and service providers support a student who is in this transition period? This one goes for both Dr. Joseph and Dr. George.
So in general, it's important to definitely make sure that they're understanding that it's a multi-step process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So for example, at the Kinney Center, we have a team of board certified behavioral analysts, licensed social workers, and also counselors. I'm both a board certified behavioral analyst and a licensed psychologist, but I'm trained in assessment and intervention procedures. So within this multidisciplinary team, we would first talk to other stakeholders within the child's life, a number of things that Cheryl just mentioned earlier. We would conduct a record review, we would do an assessment, and also meet with the family just to determine short and long-term goals and interest. So from there, we would start off the individual off potentially within our bridge program to assess the ease of transitions, behavior, and also social emotional interactions. So we definitely will focus on a number of different things depending on the student's interest. So we can work on job skills, professionalism, problem solving. Time management is also a really big one that even atypical individuals have to deal with, and also some money management skills as well.
And then I want to address a little bit on the parents' role in transition planning. And just a reminder, you do play such a vital role as a part of the team and as a decision maker. And we recognize that you know your child best. But as we get into transition planning, a very difficult thing occurs, and that is we ask you to let go a little bit and think about, presume confidence in your child to be able to try some skills that maybe and that maybe you have been assisting them with in the previous years. One thing is advocacy. You've been your child's advocate for many, many years, and you can help the schools and the other service providers teach self-advocacy to your child so that your child will have those skills and be as independent as possible. We talk about something called person-centered planning, and that is creating a plan to support the student in achieving their hopes and dreams. And that is why I say that allowing your child some freedom to choose and allowing your child to try to reach the goals, as scary as it is a very important part of this process.
Thank you, Dr. George and Dr. Joseph. Now, let's address some of the commonly asked questions from parents. How do I know if my child should be in college or workforce transition program? This one's for you, Dr. Joseph.
So that's a great question. So I talked a little bit about that previously, just with the different multi-step process, but also it's important to just ask. Sometimes individuals that are on the spectrum, everyone speaks for them, but nobody really asks them, what do they want? Sometimes that they're in the room and everybody's like, well, maybe Johnny should do this and maybe Johnny should do that. Well, why don't we just ask him what he wants to do or what he likes to do? David, I'm sure that while you were at SJU, you might have started out wanting to do something and may have switched your ideas or switched your concepts like throughout your process. So know that even if the student definitely picks, hey, I want to start off in the college setting, if that might not be working out for them, that's okay. And it's okay to be able to shift and be able to mix and move and have that be as fluid as a process as possible. So depending on that and depending on the assessment procedures and also talking to the child and having them an active participant within the planning process and within the transitional services is the first step in anything. And also seeing like how well did they do in certain school subjects? Are they doing really well with transitional services? Are they able to keep their attention span for longer periods of time where they can potentially work in the workforce development programs or pre-programming processes, or are they able to kind of dib and dab in a little bit of both? So definitely it's important. The key component is to allow the individual, whether or not how vocal they are, even if they are considered non-vocal, there are other ways that they can communicate and let you know what they like just by looking at nonverbal communication, seeing if their eyes light up, seeing if you're seeing a smile with different activities that they're doing is definitely typically really important within that process.
Thank you very much. And what other, sorry, bear with me one sec. What are some of the misconceptions about people with ASD when they come to college or workforce readiness that you hear, and how do you address them?
So there are a lot of misconceptions when dealing with this population with individuals on the spectrum. So a huge misconception is placing an individual in a box with their goals and aspirations. So that could be done by utilization of like cookie cutter interventions, for example. So just because someone has autism doesn't mean they need to be stocking shelves or doing some repetitive tasks. So for example, many of our clients at the Kinney Center want to be artists, broadcasters, and a potential client that we have called us the other day and said that they want to be an actor, right? So depending on their functioning level, it's important to allow them to test the waters and get their feet wet in a variety of things. Another huge misconception about individuals that are higher functioning are that just because they're so intelligent and they're able to potentially do more than the average person doesn't mean that they're not going to have difficulty or struggle socially or have difficulty with rigidity or interpersonal relationships. So regardless of the diagnosis, it's important to not assume in that process.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
And like kind of to add a little bit of my own experience, it's just kind of, well, talking to them. Like I'm high functioning and that's what I did. And that brings us to our next question. What are some of the barriers that impact a person's access to transitional service? All right, Dr. George first, then Dr. Joseph.
Thank you. So one of the things you need to be mindful of as teachers and as parents is, particularly if you're looking at something like supported living, is that there can be long wait lists to get into many of these programs. And so you need to start exploring those options early, which is one reason I really like that in Pennsylvania, we are required to start that process even earlier than the federal law mandates. There are costs associated with many of these programs moving forward, and that can be a real challenge for families as well. Depending on your community, I would say, for example, urban communities tend to have more resources and options. For example, more options for possible employment than many times in a rural area. Another thing I want to mention as barriers is the individual's behavior. So, and I'm going to give a personal example. So I have a brother who's 26. He has autism and developmental disabilities. And when this transition process was really getting close to when he was nearing graduation from high school, some new behaviors emerged that we had not seen ever before. And I really do believe that the transition to adulthood is a very stressful time for everyone, but particularly if you are on the spectrum, and it's very stressful. So I believe that many of those behaviors for him were a result of the anxiety he was feeling and the difficulty he had expressing his emotions. So know that these things can happen. And they can maybe, some of your plans may have to change course for a little bit until you may have to ease into some of these transition areas as a result of that. But I just want to mention that as a potential barrier sometimes to accessing certain transitional services. And then Dr. Joseph, do you have others that you want to add?
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Cheryl. I think a lot of times too, we don't necessarily think of the amount of participation and the amount of resources and things that the caregivers have to have, and the pressure that is on a lot of caregivers. I know we have a number of caregivers in the room. So the caregiver also might be dealing with their own potentially mental health concerns, and or have like a number of children at the home that also need that additional support. And a number of individuals might not also understand their full rights, right? And what they're entitled to within the school district. So for example, many individuals believe that the school, if they don't provide the services, then they wouldn't be able to have access to these services. So there's thousands of individuals that do not fit the mold of like VOTEC, for example, or learning a trade. However, some schools limit those opportunities and have that as a sole purpose for workplace development. So for example, like we have students at the Kinney Center that participate in our transitional day services. They spend an entire 2 days of their school week focusing on vocational schools, pre-programming and workforce development programs to broaden their scope of service delivery. And this is because a lot of the school districts that they're currently attending don't necessarily have those services. So they basically are allowed to provide transportation to us so that we can be able to provide the services.
All right, thank you very much. And now, much like a Pokemon, how has the field of education evolved over the years to support social and emotional behavior? Dr. George, take it away.
All right. I hope you can hear me. I've got a lot of background noise. David, are you hearing that?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I'm going to actually move rooms a minute so I can share with you a little better. So here's the exciting thing. Over the last 30 years, we've known about the need for social emotional learning, but we have been a lot better as schools about providing the social emotional learning skills. over the last 5 to 10 years. And when you think about, when I tell you what the 5 components are of social emotional learning, you'll realize how vital these skills are for individuals on the spectrum. So they are self-awareness, self-management, so teaching individuals to manage their time, manage their behavior, social awareness, huge skill that everyone needs, including individuals on the spectrum, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. So since we know that many individuals on the spectrum have trouble with arousal regulation, sometimes aggression, but not always. And we know that learning to manage your emotions, to be able to return to a calm state from an excited state or an angry state are very, very important skills. And so now schools teach things like deep breathing, mindful meditation, yoga. And another thing I want to mention, which can be done at home or at school, is exercise is huge. We know that's my research area, and we know that aerobic exercise that gets the heart rate up can help an individual on the spectrum to sleep better, to improves arousal regulation, reduces stereotypy. That's been confirmed for many years over a course of many different research studies. And so these things just in general help an individual's overall health and well-being. And so it's very exciting that schools are partnering with the community and with the family to teach those skills. And I know Kinney, Dr. Joseph, if you want to add anything here, Kinney is a great example of a community resource that assists in all of these areas.
Yeah, definitely. So Sarah, thank you so much for that. Those were some great examples and information regarding like social and emotional support and behavioral wellness. Having both disciplines, I definitely realized how important it is with the psychological aspect, the health and wellness, and also the behavioral analytical aspect to assist in these transitional services and social emotional development and wellness. Within our programs at the Kinney Center, we strive to have opportunities to keep all of our participants as active as possible and engage in a lot of hands-on learning and development. So not only do we serve as a liaison within the multidisciplinary team, we also are an advocate to make sure that our participants are getting actively involved and get moving throughout the day. So a lot of individuals think that our little guys are the only ones that be able to participate in our recreational based programs, but we ensure that all of our transitional age participants have the opportunity to participate in recreational programming throughout the day. So that could be us just talking to community stakeholders in general, to have them to see kind of what they like and what they, whether it's yoga, mindfulness, just getting moving, doing some dancercise. We just had our family wellness day yesterday. So it was really fun just to see all of our participants just getting up and get moving. But regardless of age, it's definitely important to have these mindfulness activities just to get their workflow and get them just going socially and emotionally. And in general, I wanted to close with that comment, David, that it's just a blessing that at SJU, we have the ability to use the campus as a resource as well to get them actively engaged, so we can utilize the recreation center, the different fields on campus, and within a controlled community setting with less social demands and more focus on that social and emotional development prior to them going outside and engaging in these activities in the broader outside community.
Thank you both, and I'm sorry for failing to mention Dr. Joseph in that, but the next question can be tackled by both Dr. Joseph and Dr. George. What roles do educators and parents play in this time of transition? Dr. George or Joseph, either one of you wants to start.
Sure. Related to that idea of social emotional wellness, again, it's like just even letting your child teaching your child how to prepare healthy meals and healthy snacks and getting on a good sleep routine, even though I know sleep can be a real challenge for individuals on the spectrum. And So some of my research has been, we provided swimming in a heated pool, and we found that individuals slept on average an hour more on the nights that they swam in a heated pool. So maybe that's relaxing, plus it's helping to ease them into sleep at the end of the day. So things like that you can find for your child to do are very, very helpful. And so you do play a really important role in this process as well.
Dr. Joseph, do you want to add anything?
No, I definitely agree with Cheryl. She touched on a lot of great things within campus, and I definitely agree with the pool, and just keeping them active throughout the day is huge. And it just allowing them to do something that they enjoy. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like a structured sports activity. It could just get them moving. It could be plyometrics, jumping jacks, things like that, just to get them to better transition throughout their day. So sometimes what we would do in our programming is that we would maybe have them engage in maybe a non-preferred activity, or maybe do some pre-programming or some vocational programming, and then have them kind of have a little break, have a dance break or a dance parties and things like that, just to get them moving depending on how they are. So one, they get to have fun, but they also get to show off their dance moves and be able to have fun and engage in a way where it's not definitely like that structured, I'm always sitting at the desk all day just learning.
And I'll say one other thing to teachers directly. We've done some studies where if it wasn't feasible to run, like the weather didn't permit it or what have you, we've had a little mini trampoline in the classroom and held their hands and let them jump on the trampoline. And you'll know that kids are especially need that movement, because I've observed some just run around the table before they sit down for a small group activity. And so anything that we can do to provide that, I know schools do the Go Noodle dance videos a lot as a little movement activity in between, but any ways that we can incorporate movement during the day can be a very potentially positive thing for improving attention and improving behavior and school success.
Thank you, Dr. Joseph and Dr. George. And that makes for a perfect segue into our next question: virtual programming for students with ASD. What did we learn about conducting transition program during COVID-19? Are there pros and cons? How was the shift different, perhaps, for students with ASD versus like neurotypical peers or peers with other like atypical conditions?
David, that is a really loaded, sensitive question. But when the pandemic initially just started, we had to really quickly transition and pivot our services to a virtual format. So families that were getting services literally around the clock, 5 days per week, eventually just like abruptly stopped and had nothing. So a number of interventions that were provided to students in the community just came to an abrupt halt. We actually had to pivot very quickly and provide intervention plans that could be transitioned to the home environment, and also begin to quickly transition to that virtual format to still engage with our clients, even though at the start of the pandemic, we really couldn't see them in person. We provided them with some real-time resources, so some Zoom format, real-time intervention classes and pre-programming and transitional skills services. And we also had a lot of virtual resources. So let's say a parent had, and they're actually still up on our website to this day, as far as like parents that necessarily couldn't make our real-time classes, we had provided free resources to the community, whether it was social skills, daily living skills, different transitional. Each Monday, we had what we called our parent corner. So we answered some questions that a lot of caregivers in the neighborhood had regarding just different programming services, how to wear a mask, how to just socially distance, a lot of those key component questions. So a number of interventions we were able to also witness within the comfort of their own home. So while there were some pitfalls and some hiccups along the way, we also were able to see things with our clients that we would have never been able to see if they were just coming to the Kinney Center every single day. So with that, we also, as board certified behavior analysts, we love to take data. That's what we do, right? So we actually found that when we were taking data during virtual classes, that some of our individuals that had ASD were actually thriving and participating a lot more than our typical peers were. So our scholars are undergraduate students that work with individuals with ASD. So we were taking data not only on our participants' social engagement and seeing if they were having that social and emotional wellness and well-being with programming, we were also seeing how engaged our undergraduate students at SJU were with the clients as well. And a lot of times our participants actually did a lot better than our students. And it could just be due to Zoom fatigue, but it also a lot that I've saw and just witnessed just in throughout the last year is that there's a lot less social pressure on Zoom, for instance, than there is in the real world. So a lot of personalities that we weren't able to necessarily see in person in Kinney, we were able to witness and kind of see them kind of just like flourish. And they were also be able to do those things in comfortable clothes, sometimes in their PJs, sometimes with their favorite blanket at home. So they just felt more comfortable a lot of times in their home environment, but still seeing those familiar faces throughout the time. So we did participate in like the virtual camp this summer. We had special guests come that, from all over that wouldn't necessarily be able to come. So we were able to kind of broaden our scope of practice into outside of just the local Philadelphia area. So while it had some barriers, we also saw and we had some great triumphs. So we're really excited to be able to still provide these virtual offerings, but still work on transitioning a little bit to in-person services now that, the pandemic is, hopefully subsiding over time.
Dr. Joseph, I was so happy to hear that there really were a lot of positives to pivoting to virtual instruction for all the students that you serve. And so that's a really, really exciting thing because we know too, there's a lot of challenges to this for families and parents that are trying to work and monitor all their children that are being instructed virtually and all. And so I know it can be a lot. But I wanted to just say that in terms of your rights and in terms of what the IEP says about transition planning, the team must consider how they're going to deliver transition services remotely or in a blending learning environment whenever we're under those type of conditions. A school cannot just say, oh, sorry, we can't offer some of the parts of your plan because of we're having a pandemic. They must consider all the ways that they're going to continue to provide those services in a meaningful way to the students.
Totally. I mean, it's like as someone who was like a student for the last 2 semesters during the pandemic and was fortunate to graduate, I found it like tough kind of just to get used to seeing people on screens. But like I found like I was able to keep attentive even if I wasn't always attentive. And so with that, we're now opening this up for audience questions from our Q&A, and I'm tossing this over to Cece Pagano to read the audience questions.
Thank you, David. And to our audience, if you do have any questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A section on your webinar. Dr. George, I'm going to start with you. You had mentioned supported living options earlier. Could you elaborate on that and what exactly those are?
Sure. So it can look very different for a lot of different individuals. Apartment living might be living with an atypical individual or a couple of individuals on the spectrum, and having somebody stop in to make sure that there are groceries in the house and to help with paying bills and budgeting and make sure that transportation has been reliable and getting the individuals everywhere that they need to go, that kind of thing. My brother is in a group living situation, which is in a neighborhood with 4 other young men on the spectrum, and they have round-the-clock support in their home, but they do still assist with making meals. They someone drives them to their program for vocational skills that they're still learning. They have job coaches to help them as they try out different jobs, and some have had long-term jobs since they've been there. And then, so there are just a variety of options, but again, there can be a lengthy wait list to get into an option that you might prefer as a family. And so it's really important to be exploring those options early on.
Great, thank you. And now I'll throw this out to both of you, but what type of supportive work environments are the workplaces providing to help with the adjustment?
So I could just talk a little bit about kind of what we provide at Kinney, and then we can kind of just go out from there if that works.
Yeah.
So not only are we a service provider for the individuals on the spectrum, we also provide employment training and neurodiversity in the workplace trainings for a broad array of companies to spread awareness surrounding individuals on the spectrum. So it's important for employers to be cognizant on the broad array of individuals that enter the workplace in general. So our goal at Kinney is to provide supportive employment by way of breaking larger tasks down into smaller ones and allowing them to be successful across settings. So we do that by different assessments, and we also have what's called a PACE lab at Kinney, and that's a practical assessment exploration system. So our individuals are able to get those real world work-related experiences just in a controlled environment with having job coaches within the university. So I kind of just talked about the broad array of what we do for workplaces, talking about transitional services and kind of what we do on campus, if that would answer your question.
Great, thank you. Here's a question that came in from our audience. Does my child need a high school diploma to attend a four-year college, or is a high school certificate sufficient for a college with programs directed toward the ASD community?
So that's a great question. I was looking at Cheryl, but I can start off with that one. Typically, individuals, just like Cheryl was saying a little bit earlier, are entitled to services up until 21. So depending on the functioning level, it might be best to sometimes keep the individual in services and getting the services from the school district at 21 and getting the high school diploma. So until you take that diploma, then you're basically authorized to be able to have, and by law, those services within the individualized education plan. So from there, then you would be able to then go to your next step after you take your diploma to be able to go and provide and get more additional services. But prior to, you can still provide and be an applicant for those pre-programming services and those vocational transitional services prior to you taking your high school diploma, which is ideal because you're getting your feet wet, but you're still having all the support from the school district to be able to have those services involved.
And the reason I didn't step in right away is I wasn't sure. I have to think about it, and because I'm not really involved in the admission side of things at the university, but I would think that you would need your high school diploma in order to be accepted to a four-year university. That's my best guess at that.
Great, thank you. Do you have any suggestions for a website that would provide a comprehensive resource list for families or caregivers?
I was looking at some websites, and I have to thank my colleague, Dr. Shepard, too, in special education, because she shared some websites with me and some other resources. And I actually have some other things I like to share, too, related to some apps that were in an article that she shared with me that I thought you might find interesting. But I did find pacer.org, P-A-C-E-R. I really liked that website because what they do is, let me see if I can find it. They have all kinds of stories about of different people's experience in supported employment. And I thought, just reading the stories, I thought they might be a great resource for families and teachers, because it might trigger an idea that you would have for someone that you know and say, oh, now I hadn't thought about that, but that story helped me to explore some different possible careers for some of the students that I work with, or for your own child. And I don't know if this is the right time to say this, but since I'm thinking about these apps, I wanted to tell you that Dr. Shepard shared this article with me. It's from Teaching Exceptional Children, and it was apps that are helpful in the transition to adulthood. And these apps were tested out by college students on the spectrum. And I didn't jot them all down, but I jotted down several of them. And one of them was called My Homework, which was just to help with staying organized, because we know how tricky that is when you're taking multiple classes and you have assignments due and all these different classes. So helping to stay organized with that. And one I really liked was called Circle of Six. And it was social scenarios that of threatening situations, unsafe situations that a person might find themselves in, and learning what to do in those situations, in a hypothetical, in a virtual scenario. And it really helps, I think, individuals too, to form a safety plan, so that, as individuals get older, they might be, alone more, and it might make them vulnerable. And so I really like that one, Circle of Six. Left for Spending, LEFT, Left for Spending, looked like a really good one for budgeting, for help with budgeting. And in terms of there's so many different ones you can do for deep breathing, but Breathe to Relax was one that these college students really, really liked as well. So I'd like to share those with you.
Great, thank you very much for that. This is kind of a twofold question, but for transitional age students that need one-on-one support, are there any advanced supportive employment opportunities in the local area? And also, are there any supportive employment sites that are open for tours?
So we are just limited. So with that, so I don't know just the broad scope of how many of the people in the audience have experienced or understand our transitional services. So I'll give a brief overview. So within our bridge program, we have a vocational track and we have a college bridge track. So within our vocational track, for example, we would have that one-on-one support within our program. So they would be able to first be able to do the pre-programming skills within our center, be able to potentially volunteer and or get supported employment on our campus, which is a smaller based community, and then be able from there, our hope is to then be able to then transition them in the community with support, obviously, and with having them. We actually just were able to hire a director of employment who is starting this month to be able to kind of bridge that gap outside of the university-based communities, and also be able to have those relationships with employment sites in our surrounding area, so that they can have that support within the broader Philadelphia region and community. So that's really important for us to be able to not just so much assist them within the controlled environment, but also have them be able to bridge that gap, to be able to have that one-on-one support, and then slowly kind of fade that out a little bit for them to be then prepared for the workforce outside of SJU.
Great, thank you. And this question from the audience, I'm very interested in it, because I think at some level we all are experiencing a little bit of this. But you had mentioned before, Dr. Joseph, about virtual learning and how that can be a very positive thing and how people are thriving under that. So what do you think the transition back to in-person learning will look like?
That is a great question. We're definitely seeing that now. As we all summer, we were completely virtual. And then we were able to get assistance in all of our different programs to kind of go back into person. So we're still right now, even though we are back in the office, we are still doing meetings virtually. We're still seeing some clients that aren't necessarily needing that assistance. So we basically just asked our participants before we were transitioning back, are they comfortable, obviously, with coming in, following our COVID protocol? And if they weren't, or they still kind of needed that Zoom experience or having meetings on a virtual format, we honored that, because we understand with the pandemic, not everybody was fully comfortable coming back right away. So with that, we were able to still do our meetings online. I know currently right now, our Aspire program is still doing a lot of peer meetings and peer modeling and mentorships and things with our Aspire students online still, and then they still have the opportunity to be able to come in person to be able to meet as well. So it's a smooth transition, but it also depends on the participant and also their comfort level with that. And I know David's a prime example of that. He was a graduating senior in the heat of the pandemic. And how was your experience, David, with that? Because I know you could probably chime in a better on the Aspire side of that.
As an Aspire student, it was all right. I met with my case manager, Teresa Falls, like about twice a week, and it was fairly normal, even if it was like digital. Sometimes due to like the location I was in, the internet wasn't always the best, so it would be like I'm going through the Lincoln Tunnel. But I made it through. It was just digital support. I was even a peer mentor to a bridge program like student during all online last semester, and it was sorry, it's just I had a lot to say about this. It was all right. Like the support was especially for my last semester and a tough one, helped me get through it all.
Yeah, and you're a success story, David, definitely for that. And also too, a lot of times throughout the pandemic, depending on their comfort level too, we've had some students that are participating in our programming also help others be able that were maybe having difficulty with that, Zoom experience or that virtual experience, having them come and talk about their experiences and making them feel more comfortable about like what SJ was like. We've provided virtual tours on a Zoom format if those that don't feel comfortable with coming in onto campus. So it's really individualized. And we just have a team of professionals. I speak a lot with Teresa and helping with her, and she helps with us, on our program side. We're just a collaborative team effort. And that's what I really appreciate about the Kinney Center.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Joseph and David, for the real world experience. It's really nice to have. I have one more question before I turn things back over to David. But how are companies helping with the career advancement?
Okay, so that's a great question. Companies right now, I think the big wave is the neurodiversity in the workplace that I talked about a little bit earlier. So there's a lot of requirements for being able to make sure that you're mindful in the workplace and that you're cognizant of different individuals within the workplace. So we've participated a lot in those CAUs that I talked about a little bit earlier, as far as getting people to understand individuals on the spectrum, what they can do, what they might struggle with interpersonally, making sure a lot of that training is making sure that employers aren't so literal in their communication styles. A lot of times we use just different figures of speech that an individual on the spectrum might take literally, with things, allowing for different breaks and just different modifications in the workplace environment. So it all really depends on the different, obviously the setting and where they're working. But a lot of companies now are starting to make that shift and understanding that they have a requirement to be cognizant of the different trainings that they need to have with welcoming other individuals within the workplace.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add that my colleague, Dr. Shepard, that I was talking about, she also works with people in medical school to try to get doctors and other healthcare professionals to understand the needs of individuals on the spectrum. And so anytime we can do any sort of training for first responders or doctors or businesses that might be employing the people we love on the spectrum, we want to make sure and do that. And I just think it's so wonderful that Kinney also is doing that for local businesses.
Great, thank you.
All right, and if there's not any more questions, let's conclude today's webinar. Let's wrap up with one more poll. All right, rock the vote with that poll. As you respond, I'm going to ask our panel to share any final thoughts. Start with you, Dr. Joseph. Is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with? Dr. George, any closing thoughts?
Just in general, for the parents in the room, just know that you matter. It's really important to, know your rights. And if you don't know, ask. So many times there's delay in services, or they might not have the needs, their needs met, just simply because they didn't ask a question, or they didn't necessarily advocate or really know their rights in that way. So if you're not getting what you need for your loved one, find an advocate to assist you through the process as well. And also know, if you need us at Kinney and at SJU, we're also here to assist you in this process any way that we can. Please don't hesitate to contact me in the event that you're interested in learning more about our transitional services, our bridge program, our college bridge program, and any other program offerings that we have in our night programming or weekend programming. So we welcome, just in general, to create evidence-based programming that meets the needs of all the clients that we serve. So we really thank you guys. The first step is obviously attending things like this and getting more knowledge and being more informed about the different services offerings that are around the greater community.
Thank you, Dr. Joseph. Dr. George?
I just wanted to thank you all for attending today, and it's just been a pleasure to work with Dr. Joseph and David on this presentation. And teachers, or those of you who might be interested in being special ed teachers, we offer so many different options in the Department of Special Education, and then you have opportunities to do field work out in schools and at the Kinney Center, or work at the Kinney Center as a scholar. And if there's any way I can be a resource to you, feel free to reach out to me. I'm cgeorge@sju.edu.
All right, thank you, Dr. George. And before we go, let's look at these poll results. All right, 61% of you have said, I would like to become a better advocate for individuals with autism spectrum disorder. That's a mouthful, and I'm still not getting used to saying it. On the journey from adolescence to adulthood, another 56% of you said, I am interested in learning more about specific topics as they relate to ASD, such as self-advocacy, independent living skills, legal matters, and employment opportunities. 33% of you said, I want to grow my understanding of the field of special education. And 67% of you want to know how I can help build a better future for young adults with autism, especially those in my immediate family and circle of friends. And thank you. I'd like to thank everyone who participated. And as we close today's session, I'd like to remind you that there will be a recording of this webinar made available at sju.edu/unlimitedlearning, which is a mouthful as well. Thank you, Dr. Joseph and Dr. George, again for lending your time and expertise to your conversation, to today's conversation. And thank you all for your time, attention, and participation. And tomorrow's webinar will be, which is the next one in this series, will be about Asian hate and biases with Nutia Han, and register at sju@unlimitedlearning.com. Or wait, that's not the official web address. But regardless, I am David Werner, class of 2020. Take care, stay safe, wear masks, use hand sanitizer, etc.
Thank you.